The war between human colonies and the Zithari Empire had ended just a year ago, but the wounds still burned in every soldier's heart. Captain Elias Vance, a skilled pilot, had been reassigned to simple cargo runs to keep him away from battle. Yet fate had other plans for him. A sudden storm of ion particles ripped through his ship's shields as he crossed an uncharted sector. The controls failed, alarms screamed, and the stars spun into a blur. The next moment, his craft was falling through a thick violet sky toward a strange, glowing planet. The crash was violent, throwing him against his harness. Metal groaned and flames licked the cockpit edges. He fought to stabilize the ship, but gravity won. The craft slammed into the ground, skidding across crystal-like sand before coming to a smoking stop. His head throbbed and his breath came in ragged bursts. Through the cracked canopy, he saw towering rock formations glowing with blue veins of energy. He had never seen a world like this, and deep down he knew it was not marked on any human star. Chart. Elias staggered out of the wreck, his boots sinking into the soft shimmering ground. The air was breathable, yet carried a strange, sweet scent. In the distance, shapes moved, tall, graceful figures gliding over the terrain with a silent, practiced elegance. His instincts told him to hide, but pain and exhaustion slowed him. One of the figures broke from the others and approached. As she drew closer, his heart stopped. She was unlike any being he had seen, her skin a deep shade of violet, her eyes bright like twin moons, and her presence commanding yet strangely gentle. Her name was Serenia, and the moment her gaze locked on him, he felt an unspoken warning. She glanced quickly over her shoulder toward the distant figures. Without a word, she stepped closer and whispered in a voice both sharp and urgent, "No male has set foot here for 1,000 cycles. If they find you, they will kill you." She looked him over quickly, her eyes narrowing at his wounds. Then she said, "Come with me now." He didn't know her or trust her, but something in her tone left no room for refusal. She led him through a maze of jagged rocks and glowing planks that swayed as if alive. The further they went, the quieter the world became. The light shifted from bright blue to deep gold as they entered a cavern hidden behind a waterfall of liquid light. Inside, the air was warm and the walls shimmered with strange symbols. Serenia motioned for him to stay low. "This is a sacred planet," she whispered. "It belongs to my people alone. You are a danger just by breathing here." Her words struck him as both warning and confession. Elias finally found his voice. "Why are you helping me?" She paused, her back to him, and for a long moment she didn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer. "Because I saw the sky burn when you fell. It is not in me to let someone die alone." Her shoulders were tense, and her hand hovered near a thin blade in her hip. He could tell she was torn between duty and something else. He wondered if bringing here risked her own life. The thought made him uneasy, but also strangely grateful. In the distance, a low horn echoed, carried by the wind into the cavern. Serenia froze. "They are searching already," she said. "If they catch your scent, nothing will save you." She stepped closer, her eyes scanning his face. "Do exactly as I tell you, human. No sound, no sudden moves, and never speak your name out loud here." Elias nodded, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. He realized she was not just hiding him, she was defying every law of her people. Outside, the horn sounded again, closer this time. Shadows moved past the waterfall, tall and armed. Serenia pressed a hand to his chest, signaling him to stay behind the shimmering curtain of liquid light. The warmth of her touch was brief, but in that moment, Elias understood the danger was real. And for the first time since the crash, he feared not just for himself, but for her. The shadows outside the waterfall lingered for several breaths before sliding away into the mist. Elias dared not move. Serenia's eyes stayed fixed on the shifting light patterns beyond the veil of falling water. Her jaw was tight, and he could see her muscles tense beneath the flowing fabric of her robe. The silence felt heavy, as if the entire cavern was holding its breath alongside them. When she finally turned to face him, her gaze was sharp. "We have little time. My sisters will sweep this valley, and they will find your ship. Once they see it, they will know a male is here." Her voice carried a strange mix of authority and unease. Elias could not tell which part of her wanted to protect him and which part wanted to send him away. Either way, he knew his life was now tied to her decision. She moved deeper into the cavern, motioning for him to follow. Strange crystals jutted from the walls, casting shifting colors across her skin. The further they walked, the more alien symbols appeared carved into the stone. Elias tried to focus on his steps, but his mind kept circling back to her words. No male had set foot here for 1,000 cycles. That meant even his presence in her company could bring severe punishment. He wondered why she would risk herself. For someone she had just met, Serenia stopped at a small chamber where the walls glowed faintly with a golden hue. She reached into a niche and pulled out a small flask made of polished shell. "Drink this. It will mask your scent from the scouts," she said. Elias hesitated, but the urgency in her tone left no room for argument. The liquid was warm and bitter, yet strangely soothing as it went down. "It will only last for a short while," she added, her eyes watching him closely. A distant rumble shook the cavern floor. Elias looked at her questioningly, but she didn't answer right away. Instead, she pressed her ear against the stone wall, listening. "The sentinels are moving closer. We must reach the lower tunnels before they seal them." She handed him a folded piece of cloth. "Wrap your head with this. Your hair will betray you." Her fingers brushed his as she gave it to him, and for the briefest second, her expression softened. They moved quickly, the air growing cooler as they descended into the darker depths of the planet's underbelly. The sound of rushing underground streams echoed through the tunnels. Elias followed her every step, careful not to slip on the damp stone. Her pace was steady, but her eyes darted to every shadow, as if expecting danger at any turn. He wondered what her sisters were truly like, and why the thought of them finding him made her voice tighten. After what felt like an hour, they entered a wider passage where glowing fungi clung to the ceiling. Serenia slowed her steps. "This path leads to the Temple of the First Mothers," she said. "If we are seen here, they will know I am hiding something." Elias noticed how her tone changed when speaking of the temple. There was reverence in her words, but also fear. He guessed this place held power among her people, and power often came with rules not meant to be broken. The glow from the fungi illuminated their faces as they moved closer to the temple's outer wall. Intricate carvings told stories of battles, victories, and sacred vows. Elias could not read the symbols, but he could feel the weight of history pressing in on him. Serenia stopped suddenly, holding out her hand to halt him. Two figures in ceremonial armor passed across the corridor ahead, their weapons gleaming. They spoke in a language he couldn't understand, but the tone was unmistakable. They were searching. Serenia waited until the guards vanished around a bend before she moved again. Her steps were lighter now, her movements more cautious. "If they see you, I will not be able to speak for you," she whispered. "They will take you to the council, and you will not leave alive." Her words carried no threat, only the plain weight of truth. Elias nodded, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. He had faced enemies before, but this was different. Here, he was not a soldier. He was prey. Elias stayed close behind Serenia as they moved deeper into the temple's shadowed halls. The walls here seemed older, worn smooth by countless centuries. The air was warmer, and there was a faint scent of burning herbs. He could hear distant chanting, low and rhythmic, vibrating through the stone beneath his feet. It made his skin prickle, as though unseen eyes were already watching him. Serenia paused at a carved doorway, her hand brushing against its surface. "This is the Hall of Oaths," she murmured. "Only the priestesses may enter. If they find you here, they will call for judgment." Her voice carried no exaggeration. Elias could tell she meant every word. He thought of his ship lying broken somewhere above, its location no doubt discovered by now. If her people were looking for him, it was only a matter of time before their paths crossed. She stepped inside, pulling him with her before he could speak. The hall was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow. Rows of tall stone pillars lined the path, each one engraved with glowing runes. The chanting was louder now, though Elias could not see where it came from. Serenia moved with careful grace, her eyes scanning ahead as though expecting someone to appear at any moment. Elias followed, his footsteps muffled by a thin layer of soft dust. At the far end of the hall, a small archway led into another chamber. Here, the light was dim and golden, cast by bowls of glowing liquid set into the floor. The smell of herbs was stronger, mixed with something sharp and metallic. Serenia turned to him. "You will stay here while I speak with someone I trust. Do not move from this place. If you hear voices, do not answer them." Her words struck him like iron. He nodded, though unease tightened in his chest. She slipped away, vanishing into a narrow side passage. The room seemed to grow colder in her absence. Elias scanned the walls, noticing murals that told strange stories. Figures with violet skin standing over fallen warriors, temples rising from seas of light, and a lone figure walking into a storm. The last image held his gaze the longest. Something about it felt almost human, though he could not explain why. A sudden noise broke the silence, the faint scrape of metal against stone. Elias turned sharply toward the sound, his heart pounding. From the shadows near the far wall, a tall figure emerged. Unlike Serenia, this alien woman's robes were dark, and her expression was unreadable. Her eyes locked on him, and she tilted, her head slightly as if assessing a dangerous animal. "You are not meant to be here," she said, her voice calm but edged with steel. Elias searched for words, but none came. The woman took a step closer, the golden light reflecting off the silver bands on her wrists. "Do you know what your presence means?" she asked. "Do you understand the risk to her?" It was then he realized she must know Serenia. The thought made his throat tighten. He wanted to speak, to defend himself, but he remembered Serenia's warning. Instead, he remained silent. The woman studied him for another moment, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "She is bold, even for one of her standing," she said. "Whether that boldness saves you or destroys you, I cannot say." Without another word, she turned and slipped back into the shadows. Elias stood frozen, unsure if he had just been threatened or spared. Moments later, Serenia returned, her eyes sharp as she scanned the room. "Did anyone come here?" she asked quickly. Elias hesitated, then shook his head. He could not bring himself to tell her about the encounter. Something in him warned that speaking of it would change the fragile balance between them. She gave him a long look, as if sensing he was holding something back, but said nothing. "We must leave now. They are closing the gates to the outer halls," she said. They retraced their steps through the Hall of Oaths, moving faster than before. The chanting had stopped, replaced by the sound of hurried footsteps somewhere nearby. Serenia kept him close, guiding him through narrow passages that seemed carved to confuse outsiders. When they finally stepped into the open air beyond the temple, Elias breathed in deeply. The violet sky was darkening, and distant lights moved across the horizon. He knew it was only a matter of time before they found him, and the thought weighed heavily on them both. The wind outside the temple was colder now, carrying with it a faint metallic tang. Serenia led Elias away from the carved steps, her movements quick and precise. They kept close to the shadows where the rock walls rose high, blocking them from open view. Elias's eyes scanned the terrain, noticing strange, glowing plants curling toward the sky. Every sound, a rustle, a crack of stone, made him tense. Somewhere behind them, he could hear the faint hum of voices carried on the wind. They moved along a narrow ridge until they reached a small opening in the rock face. Serenia slipped inside first, signaling for him to follow. The passage was low, forcing him to crouch, and the air was warmer than outside. It smelled faintly of minerals and some kind of burning resin. "This will take us to the outer caves," Serenia whispered. "From there, we can find a path to the river tunnels. The river will hide our tracks." Her tone left no room for hesitation. As they pressed forward, the light from the entrance faded, leaving them in near darkness. Only the faint glow of her robe and the occasional shimmer of crystal veins in the stone gave them direction. Elias could feel the damp walls brushing his shoulders. He tried to focus on moving quietly, but his thoughts kept drifting to the alien woman walking ahead of him. She was risking everything for him, and he still did not know why. The mystery made every step heavier. The tunnel eventually widened into a cavern with a ceiling high enough to stand fully. Stalactites dripped with slow droplets that echoed in the silence. A small stream trickled across the floor, catching light from unseen sources. Serenia paused at the water's edge, kneeling to touch it. "This comes from the northern river. We will follow it until we reach the Shadow Falls," she said. Elias crouched beside her, feeling the cold water run over his fingers. It was clean, but it carried a faint vibration. As if alive, they followed the stream through winding corridors, the sound of flowing water masking their footsteps. Twice, Serenia stopped abruptly, holding out her hand for silence. Once it was because of a faint glimmer of torchlight ahead. Another time, it was the sound of boots striking stone in a measured rhythm. Each time, they waited until the danger passed before moving again. Elias could feel the tension building, every step bringing them closer to something he could not yet see. The passage began to slope downward, the air growing colder and heavier. Mist clung to the walls, and the ground became slippery with moss. Serenia's steps were steady despite the conditions. Elias followed carefully, his mind sharp with the knowledge that one misstep could send him tumbling into darkness. The sound of rushing water grew louder until it drowned out all other noise. Then, through the mist, he saw it, the shadow falls she had spoken of. The falls were unlike anything Elias had ever seen. Water cascaded from an unseen height into a black pool that shimmered with tiny points of light, like stars caught beneath the surface. The air here was thick and cool, carrying the scent of the surrounding stone. Serenia led him to a ledge overlooking the pool. "This place is not patrolled. It is forbidden to all but the keepers, and they do not come here without reason," she explained. Her voice held a note of caution that made Elias uneasy. They descended to the edge of the pool, where the roar of the falls made speaking nearly impossible. Serenia gestured for him to wade into the shallows. The water was shockingly cold, sending a jolt through his body. She followed, her movements fluid and controlled. In the center of the pool, she pointed to a submerged opening in the rock. "This is the path to the deep tunnels. It will take us away from the temple lands." Her eyes held his for a moment before she added, "Once we go in, we cannot come back easily." Elias nodded, knowing he had no real choice. They both took a deep breath before diving beneath the surface. The water closed over his head, and the world became a blur of green light and swirling currents. He followed the pale shape of Serenia ahead, her hair streaming like dark ribbons in the water. His lungs burned as they swam, but finally they emerged into another cavern, gasping for air. The silence here was deep, the air warmer than before. Serenia looked around cautiously before speaking. "We are in the old river chambers," she said. "Few know these paths now. They were used in the first wars to move unseen between cities. If we are lucky, they will still serve that purpose. Elias rested against the wall, catching his breath. He realized just how far from the surface they must be. The thought made him uneasy, but it also gave him hope. For now they were hidden from the eyes of her people, and that was enough. The old river chambers were vast and silent, their walls curved smooth by centuries of flowing water. Faint lines of luminescent moss traced along the stone, giving the space a dim green glow. Elias could hear the distant sound of dripping water, each drop echoing as if the whole chamber listened. Serenia moved ahead, her steps light and careful, scanning the shadows as they walked. The floor sloped downward toward a narrow channel where water still flowed, slow and dark. Serenia knelt, dipping her fingers into it. "It runs to the outer valley," she said. "If we follow it, we can reach the border of my people's lands." Her voice was steady, but Elias noticed the way her eyes lingered on the shadows. She was cautious now, as if expecting trouble to find them here as well. They followed the channel, moving through winding passages where the air grew warmer and the glow of moss brightened. The walls here bore old markings, worn by time but still visible. Elias traced one with his fingers as he passed, a carving of tall figures holding spears, their faces stern and unyielding. He wondered if they were the ancestors Serenia had spoken of, the ones who had sworn to keep their land free from any male's presence. After a time, they came to a place where the water spread into a shallow basin. Above it, a crack in the ceiling let in a shaft of golden light. Dust motes drifted through it, swirling slowly in the warm air. Serenia stopped, looking up at the light with a strange expression. "This is where the first oath was taken," she said quietly. "It was here my people swore to kill any man who set foot on this world." The words hung heavy between them. Elias studied her face, trying to read the thoughts behind her calm tone. She seemed torn between her loyalty to that oath and her choice to protect him. "If they find us," he said, "they'll hold you as guilty as me." She met his gaze, her eyes steady. "I know. That is why we must keep moving." Her voice was calm, but her hand tightened on the hilt of the blade at her side. They left the basin and continued along the channel until the tunnel widened again. Here, the air was thick with the smell of damp stone and roots. The sound of water grew louder, echoing from ahead. Serenia raised her hand, signaling him to stop. She leaned close to the wall, listening. Faint voices carried through the rock, her language spoken quickly and sharply. Elias could not understand the words, but the tone told him everything. They were hunting. She pulled him into a narrow fissure between the walls, just wide enough for them to stand pressed close together. The voices grew louder and shadows moved along the main tunnel. Elias could feel her breathing, slow and controlled, even as the tension in her body told him she was ready to fight if needed. The hunters passed, their footsteps splashing through the shallow water, and the sound faded. Serenia waited a moment longer before leading him out. They walked for what felt like hours, the twists and turns of the tunnels making it impossible for Elias to guess their direction. At last, they reached a wide cavern where the channel became a rushing stream. A wooden platform clung to the far wall, half rotted, but still standing. Serenia stepped onto it, testing its strength. "It will hold," she said, motioning for him to follow. From here, a carved stairway wound upward, disappearing into darkness. As they climbed, the air grew cooler and fresher. Elias could feel a faint breeze against his face, carrying the scent of open air. His muscles ached from the climb, but he forced himself to keep pace with her. At last, a pale light appeared above them. They emerged into a narrow valley surrounded by jagged cliffs. The sky here was a lighter shade of violet, streaked with the glow of a distant sun. Serenia paused, scanning the horizon. "This is the outer valley," she said. "Beyond those cliffs lies the border." but the patrols will be heavier there. If we are seen, there will be no escape. Elias nodded, his mind already calculating the risks. They were closer to freedom than before, yet the danger was greater than ever. The next steps they took could decide whether they lived or died, and neither of them could turn back now. Asterisk, the cliffs ahead rose like jagged teeth. There, dark stone streaked with veins of glowing minerals. Serenia led Elias along the valley floor, keeping close to the rock wall where shadows were deepest. The air was still, carrying no sound but the crunch of their steps on the loose gravel. Elias kept his eyes moving, scanning for any sign of movement above. The silence here felt unnatural, as if the valley itself was holding its breath. They reached a narrow cut between two cliffs, its entrance partly hidden by a cluster of tall pale plants. Serenia stopped, crouching low to study the ground. "Tracks," she said quietly. Elias looked down and saw faint impressions in the dust. Long, narrow prints unlike hers. "Scouts," she added, "we are not alone here." Her gaze shifted to the cliff tops, scanning for movement before she motioned for him to follow her inside. The passage was steep and uneven, forcing them to climb in short bursts. Loose stones shifted under their boots, sending small slides rattling down behind them. Elias kept his breathing steady, though his muscles burned from the effort. Serenia moved with practiced ease, finding footholds he would have missed. She glanced back once, her eyes sharp and alert, as if measuring his ability to keep up. He pushed harder, not wanting to be the reason they slowed halfway up. The sound of voices reached them, faint but unmistakable. Serenia pressed herself flat against the rock, pulling him into a shallow recess in the cliff face. The voices grew clearer, the words spoken in her language. Elias could hear the edge of authority in their tone, though he could not understand the meaning. Serenia's grip on his arm tightened until the voices passed, and the sound faded into the wind. They climbed the rest of the way in silence until they reached a ledge overlooking the outer valley. From here, Elias could see far into the distance, a rolling expanse of jagged rock, broken by narrow streams of pale light from the sky above. Serenia crouched beside him, pointing to a thin trail winding toward a dark ridge on the horizon. "That is the border," she said. "If we reach it, you will be beyond the sacred lands." Her voice was calm, but her eyes held the weight of everything that still stood in their way. They descended into a shallow basin where the ground was cracked and dry. Strange plants with sharp metallic leaves grew in clusters, their edges whispering against each other in the wind. Elias stepped carefully, wary of the razor-like tips. Serenia moved ahead, scanning the basin with slow, deliberate movements. Her hand never strayed far from the blade at her hip. Every sound made her pause, as if she could feel danger closing in from unseen corners. In the center of the basin, they found a ring of standing stones, each carved with deep symbols worn smooth by time. Serenia slowed, her gaze flicking over the markings. "This place marks the path of the Watchers," she said. "If they see us here, they will not speak first. They will strike." Elias studied the carvings but could make no sense of them. The stones seemed to hum faintly in the wind, a sound that set his teeth on edge. They left the circle and crossed to the far side of the basin, where the ground rose again. As they climbed, Elias noticed the sky darkening, the violet hue deepening toward black. Small lights flickered high above, not stars, but moving points of gold. Serenia stopped to watch them, her expression tense. "Patrols," she said. "They searched the borders by air." She pulled him into the shadow of a rock overhang, waiting until the lights drifted away before moving again. The ridge loomed closer now, its jagged peaks cutting into the sky. The wind was stronger here, carrying the smell of rain. Elias could feel the tension in his chest ease just slightly. The border was close, and beyond it, safety might be possible. But when he glanced at Serenia, her expression was harder than before. The closer we are, the more dangerous it becomes, she warned. They guard the border more fiercely than the heart of the land. Her words settled heavy between them. They pushed onward until the trail narrowed to a single path cut into the side of the ridge. One wrong step here would send them plunging into the chasm below. Elias kept his back to the rock wall, moving slowly as Serenia led the way. The wind howled through the gap, pulling at their robes and threatening to unbalance them. Every step was a test of focus and control. When they finally reached a small plateau halfway up, they stopped to catch their breath, both knowing the final stretch would be the most dangerous yet. The plateau gave them a short moment of rest, but the sound of the wind and the distant thrum of movement above kept Elias from relaxing. Serenia stood near the edge, scanning the sky for patrols. Her hand rested lightly on the hilt of her blade, her eyes sharp and focused. She turned to him with a look that spoke of urgency more than fear. "We move now, before the ridge is watched again," she said. They began the climb toward the upper ridge, the path narrowing until only one could move at a time. Elias kept close behind her, careful not to dislodge any loose stones. The rock beneath his hands was cold and rough, cutting into his skin as he gripped for balance. The wind grew stronger the higher they climbed, whipping at their clothes and pulling strands of Serenia's dark hair across her face. She never slowed, her steps steady and precise. Halfway up, the sound of wings broke through the wind. Elias froze, glancing upward. Dark shapes circled against the violet sky, their wings wide and silent. Serenia hissed a warning and pulled him into a shallow alcove in the rock. They crouched low as two winged scouts passed overhead, their shadows sliding over the cliff face. Elias held his breath until the shapes drifted out of sight, the only sound the pounding of his heartbeat. When they reached the ridge's crest, the view opened wide before them. Beyond the jagged border, the land stretched out in rolling plains, their surface shimmering under the pale light of the distant sun. Elias felt a surge of relief at the sight, but Serenia's gaze stayed fixed on the rocky slope ahead. "The last watch post is near," she said. "If we are seen now, there will be no chance to escape." Her words cut through any sense of victory he had felt. They descended along a narrow trail carved into the far side of the ridge. Here, the rock was looser, the ground shifting under their steps. Small stones clattered down the slope, making Elias wince at the noise. Serenia moved more slowly now, her eyes scanning every shadow along the path. Once, she stopped completely, kneeling to study the ground. Elias saw faint marks in the dust, fresh, sharp, and leading toward the border. They followed the trail until it led into a shallow ravine where the walls closed in tightly. The air was still here, almost heavy, and the light from above struggled to reach the ground. Serenia raised her hand in warning, motioning for silence. A faint metallic sound echoed from ahead, the rhythm of weapons shifting in practiced hands. Elias felt the tension rise in his chest as they crept forward to the ravine's mouth. Two figures stood guarding a narrow arch of stone that marked the final passage to the border. Their armor was dark and polished, their posture rigid. Serenia watched them for a long moment before pulling Elias back behind a rock outcrop. "They will not leave their post unless called," she said. "We must wait for the change in the watch." Her voice was low, but the weight of her words left no doubt about the danger of their position. They waited in silence, the minutes stretching long. Elias felt every muscle in his body ache from the stillness, but he dared not move. Serenia's eyes never left the guards. Then, far above, a horn sounded, deep and resonant, rolling across the rocks. The guards turned sharply, speaking to each other in quick, clipped tones. Without a word, they moved toward the sound, leaving the arch. Unguarded, Serenia rose at once, pulling Elias with her. They crossed the open space quickly, their footsteps muffled by the dust. The arch loomed over them, carved with ancient runes that glimmered faintly in the dim light. As they passed beneath it, Elias felt a strange shift in the air, as if they had crossed an unseen boundary. On the other side, the ground sloped gently toward the plains, the open land spreading wide and unbroken. For the first time since the crash, Elias felt a genuine sense of hope. The border was behind them, and the path ahead held no immediate threat. Serenia paused beside him, her gaze sweeping the horizon. "We are not safe yet," she said, her voice calm but firm. "They will know soon, and they will follow." Elias nodded, knowing the journey was far from over. But for now, they had crossed a line that could not be easily reversed. Asterisk, the plain stretched wide before them, painted in shades of silver and pale gold under the distant sun. The air here was lighter, carrying the scent of open grasslands instead of stone and dust. Elias walked beside Serenia, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of pursuit. Behind them, the ridge stood like a jagged wall, its shadow still reaching toward them as if unwilling to let them go. They moved quickly, using shallow dips in the land as cover. Serenia kept her attention on the ground as much as the sky, watching for any sign of traps or patrol trails. Her pace was steady, and she spoke little now, as if every word risked drawing danger closer. Elias understood the silence. Out here, they were visible to anyone with sharp enough eyes, and their survival depended on being nothing more than shadows in the grass. After some distance, they reached a small cluster of twisted trees growing around a pool of clear water. Serenia stopped, kneeling to drink while keeping one hand on the hilt of her blade. Elias joined her, the cool water easing the dryness in his throat. "We will rest here for a short time," she said. "Once the sun begins to sink, we move again." Her voice carried no hint of relief, only the certainty of someone who had lived too long with danger. As they rested, Elias studied her face in the soft light, filtering through the leaves. He saw the lines of resolve in her expression, the focus in her eyes that never seemed to fade. She had risked everything for him, defying laws older than both their worlds. "Why did you not leave me where I fell?" he asked. Serenia's gaze met his, steady and unflinching. "Because I saw you fight to live," she said. "And I would not let that fight end in silence." The quiet moment ended when a distant horn call rolled across the plains. Serenia's head snapped toward the sound, her eyes narrowing. "They are closer than I thought," she said. Without hesitation, she rose and motioned for him to follow. They left the trees, moving at a faster pace now, the grass bending under their steps. Elias could feel the tension building again. Each horn blast a reminder that the safety they sought was still far ahead. As the sun lowered, the land shifted into rolling hills. Long shadows stretched over the ground, giving them more places to hide. Serenia led them along the edge of a dry riverbed, their feet crunching softly on the cracked earth. The horn calls grew less frequent, but no less urgent. Elias wondered how many were hunting them, and if they had already marked the path they were taking. By nightfall, they reached the edge of a low cliff overlooking a valley lit by scattered clusters of glowing plants. Serenia pointed to a line of faint lights on the far side. "Those are human beacons," she said. "If we reach them, your people will find us." The sight filled Elias with a sharp rush of hope, but it was tempered by the weight in her voice. She was not speaking of her own safety, only his. They descended into the valley, moving carefully among the glowing plants. The air was warmer here, filled with a faint hum from the strange flora. Elias could see shapes moving in the distance, too far to identify but close enough to feel the risk. Serenia slowed their pace, weaving between patches of light until they reached the shadow of a large boulder. She stopped there, listening to the night. "They are here," she whispered. Figures emerged from the darkness at the edge of the valley, tall, armed, and moving with purpose. Serenia stepped in front of Elias, her blade drawn. The hunters called out in their language, the words sharp and demanding. Serenia answered in a tone that carried both authority and defiance. The exchange was brief, ending with one of the hunters raising their weapon. In that instant, Serenia moved, striking with precision that dropped the first attacker. Before they could fire, the fight was swift and brutal, Serenia moving like a shadow in the dim light. Elias fought alongside her, using every scrap of training he had left. When the last hunter fell, the valley was silent again, except for their breathing. Serenia sheathed her blade, her gaze turning toward the human beacons. "Go," she said. "Quietly. Your people will take you from here." Elias shook his head, unwilling to leave her behind. She gave a faint smile, one that held both sorrow and pride. "I cannot go with you. This is my land, and I will face what comes. But you will live, and that is enough." Elias stood for a moment longer, searching her eyes for any sign she would change her mind. When none came, he nodded and stepped toward the lights. Each step away from her felt heavier than the last. He glanced back once to see her standing tall in the glow of the strange plants, her figure steady and unyielding. And though they would walk separate paths from that night on, he knew she had given him something no law or border could take, the gift of his life and the memory of the one who had saved it.